My daughter took my ex-wife and her stepfather to meet her fiancé's family. She said I'd embarrass. I understand, I whispered. Before we get into the story, I just want to say thank you to everyone supporting the channel. We're getting really close to 2,000 subscribers, and if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd really appreciate it if you did. Every subscription helps us grow, and I genuinely appreciate all of your support. The next morning, everything exploded. My ex-wife, my daughter, and my daughter's stepfather barged into my house, demanding answers. Then my daughter's fiancé looked at me, said one sentence, and the entire room went silent. Here's what happened. Hey Reddit, I'm Jace, a 50-year-old union electrician. I've been working with IBEW Local 364 in Rockford, Illinois, for the past 28 years. I live in a modest ranch-style house off Alpine Road, the same place I bought after my divorce 12 years ago. My ex-wife, Vivian, decided that her yoga instructor understood her better than I ever could. That man, Wesley, was a trust fund kid who had never worked a real job in his life. They got married about 18 months after our divorce was finalized. Our daughter, Brooke, was 14 when everything fell apart. She was old enough to know exactly what had happened, but still young enough to be influenced by expensive gifts and empty promises. Wesley had plenty of both. The Monday before Thanksgiving was the day my life changed. Rockford was wrapped in that gloomy late November weather where the gray sky feels like it's pressing down on your shoulders. I'd just finished rewiring an old storefront on East State Street. The place smelled like mildew and forgotten businesses. Even after leaving the job site, my hands still carried the familiar scent of copper wire and electrical tape. When I got home, I dropped my tool bag by the front door. The house was silent except for the steady ticking of the kitchen clock. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee the old-fashioned way and started scrolling through my phone. That's when Brooke texted me. She said she wanted to stop by on Wednesday with her fiancé, Connor, after they got back from a trip. Curious, I asked where they were going. She didn't answer right away. Finally, a reply popped up. Madison, meeting Connor's family. I stared at the screen. Madison wasn't that far away, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours with traffic, but it was still the kind of trip you planned in advance. Naturally, I asked if I was coming too. After all, when your daughter gets engaged, you meet her future in-laws. You shake hands, introduce yourself, and become part of the family. Her response came almost immediately. Just Mom and Wesley are coming. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I wasn't angry yet, just confused. I texted back. Why? She replied, Connor's family is traditional. It's just easier this way. Easier? I asked. What does that mean? Then came the message that I still can't forget. I don't want to be embarrassed. Please don't make this a big deal. Embarrassed. I stared at that word for a long time. I typed out 3 different replies. Deleted every one of them. Finally, I sent just 2 words. Got it. I sat alone at my kitchen table, sipping coffee that had already gone cold, wondering when I became the parent who was easier to leave out. The parent you quietly pretend doesn't exist. The one whose role in your life gets edited out because it makes the story more convenient. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. It was my brother, Ricky. He worked at a body shop on the south side, and somehow he always knew when something was wrong. His text simply read, Yo, brother, you good? I told him I'd call him later. That night, I barely slept. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying 26 years of memories. Every child support payment made on time. Every birthday. Every holiday pickup and drop-off. The car I co-signed when Brooke turned 19 and needed reliable transportation. The semester abroad I helped pay for after Vivian claimed she couldn't afford it. The night Brooke needed emergency surgery at 16, when I spent 6 hours sitting in a hospital waiting room while Vivian and Wesley were off at some luxury spa retreat. Completely unreachable. 26 years of being her father. And apparently I wasn't even worth a seat at the table. The next morning, around 7:15, while pouring my first cup of coffee and wondering if I was getting too old for this kind of heartbreak, I opened Facebook. That's when I saw it. Brooke had posted pictures from the night before. She was dressed beautifully, smiling like she'd just won the lottery. Vivian stood beside her with that familiar smug expression. And Wesley. He had one arm wrapped around Brooke's shoulders, grinning from ear to ear. They were standing outside an upscale restaurant in Madison with exposed brick walls and warm string lights, the kind of place where a steak costs $40 before drinks. Looking at that photo, I realized something had changed forever. It was the kind of restaurant where a single steak cost $40. Then I read the caption. Family dinner with my parents before tomorrow's big meeting. So grateful for my amazing dad and everything he's done for me. Dad. She had called Wesley her dad. After 26 years, over 2 decades of raising her, providing for her, and being the man whose blood ran through her veins. I was watching my own daughter publicly introduce her stepfather as her father. Meanwhile, I was sitting alone in my kitchen, feeling like a ghost who hadn't realized he was already gone. Just then, my phone rang. It was Ricky. You saw it? He asked without even saying hello. Your daughter? Yeah, I replied quietly. That's messed up, Jace. Seriously messed up. I couldn't argue with him. There was a brief silence before Ricky spoke again. You know what the worst part is? She knew you'd see that post. She didn't do it by accident. He was right. Brooke wasn't naive. She had inherited her mother's talent for hurting people while making it seem completely innocent. If anyone confronted her, she'd simply say they were overreacting or reading too much into it. I told Ricky I'd call him later and hung up. Then I sent Brooke one message. Since Wesley is your dad now, let him be your father. You're cut off. After sending it, I turned off my phone and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of multiple cars pulling into my driveway. I looked out the window. Brooke's luxury SUV was parked behind Vivian's Mercedes. The entire group had arrived. Brooke, Vivian, and Wesley, standing there in another expensive cashmere coat, looking just as smug as ever. Apparently, nothing says family emergency like showing up in 2 luxury vehicles to lecture your father about his feelings. They didn't even bother knocking. Brooke still had the spare key from the weekends she used to spend with me, so she unlocked the door and walked straight inside as if she owned the place. Vivian and Wesley followed behind her. Vivian immediately scanned my kitchen, silently judging everything that didn't meet her standards. Wesley positioned himself near the doorway while Brooke stood in front of me. As always, Vivian spoke first. Jace, we need to talk. I stayed where I was, sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee in one hand and Facebook still open on my phone. Do we? I asked. Brooke stepped forward. You saw the post. Before you turn this into some huge drama. I looked at her. Some huge drama? You publicly called Wesley your dad. You announced it to the entire internet. Wesley stepped in with that practiced smile of his. Jace, I understand you're hurt. I raised my hand and stopped him. No, let's stop right there. You don't get to comment on this. Apparently you're the preferred father now, so congratulations. Start acting like it. His smile faded. Vivian's expression instantly hardened. This attitude, Brooke said, shaking her head. This is exactly why I didn't want you there. What attitude? I asked. The attitude where I acknowledge I exist? The attitude where I have feelings? Or the attitude where I'm more than just an ATM you call whenever you need money? Nobody said that, Vivian replied coldly. You didn't have to. Your actions said it for you. You took your husband to meet my daughter's future in-laws and introduced him as her father. So what exactly did you tell them about me? That I'm just some guy who occasionally shows up on holidays? That I'm basically a roommate who helps pay the bills? No one answered. I looked directly at Brooke. What did you tell Connor's parents about me? She stayed silent. Brooke. Her jaw tightened before she finally answered. The Hartleys don't like messy divorces. They're traditional. They're old money. Mom told them you were basically out of the picture. It was easier. There it was. Easier. I repeated. So wiping away 26 years of me being your father was easier? She shrugged. It wasn't erasing you. It was just presenting things differently. I stared at her. No. It was a lie. You lied to your future in-laws about the man who raised you. She rolled her eyes. Biologically, sure. But being a father is about more than DNA. Then she looked me straight in the eyes and said the words I'll never forget. You never acted like a real father, Jace. Felt like someone had swung a sledgehammer straight into my chest. For a long moment, I couldn't say anything. Finally, I nodded. Okay, I whispered. I understand. Brooke actually looked surprised that I wasn't arguing. Vivian exchanged a quick glance with Wesley. The room fell silent. After a moment, Wesley cleared his throat. The Hartley family has certain expectations. I don't care, I said. He stopped talking immediately. Vivian stepped forward. You're making this far more dramatic than it needs to be. I slowly stood up. No, I'm done. We came here to make peace, she said through clenched teeth. I looked at all three of them. No, you came here because Brooke wants something. Brooke frowned. What is that supposed to mean? I looked at my daughter. For just a second, I tried to find the little girl who used to run into my arms every time I came home from work. The teenager who cried on my shoulder after her first heartbreak. The young woman who once called me in tears because her car had broken down on I-90, and I drove 2 hours through a snowstorm just to make sure she got home safely. I searched for that girl, but all I saw standing in front of me was someone I barely recognized. All I could see was a stranger standing in front of me. She wore expensive clothes and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had learned to treat people as if they were disposable. Somewhere along the way, she'd been taught that appearances mattered more than loyalty. It means the free ride is over, I said quietly. Brooke's face immediately lost its color. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the account I opened for you when you were 3 years old. The one I've been putting money into ever since. The one I always told you was there for emergencies. And one day, for your wedding. I paused for a moment before finishing. I closed it this morning before you got here. Her mouth fell open. You did what? Vivian's eyes widened. Have you lost your mind? You can't do that. I already did. I looked directly at Brooke. That money was mine. I saved it for my daughter. I let the words hang for a moment. And apparently, I'm not her father anymore. So she can forget about it. Brooke finally managed to speak. How much was in it? I told her. The number filled the room with silence. Even Wesley let out a low whistle. That's substantial, he admitted. 23 years of contributions, plus compound interest. Brooke's face turned from pale to bright red. You can't just take it back. It's mine. I looked at her calmly. Watch me. I need that money for my wedding. Then ask your dad. I deliberately let the words sink in. You know, your real dad, Wesley. I'm sure he'll be happy to pay for everything. Wesley's jaw tightened. Vivian looked ready to explode. Brooke was trembling with anger. You're going to regret this. I shrugged. Maybe. But at least I'll be regretting it with my savings still in my account and my self-respect still intact. Without another word, Brooke stormed out of the house. Vivian rushed after her, already pulling out her phone. Wesley stayed behind for another second. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was hatred. Honestly, it could have been both. You know this isn't over, he said. I smiled. It is for me. He didn't answer. He simply turned around and walked away. Once they were gone, I headed out to my garage and went back to organizing my tools. That night, Ricky called. After I told him everything that had happened, he burst out laughing. About time, he said once he caught his breath. I've been waiting years for you to stand up to them. I admitted that, surprisingly, it felt good. It should, he replied. They've been walking all over you ever since the divorce. He wasn't wrong. I'd spent so many years trying to be the bigger person that I'd slowly turned into a doormat. Not anymore. The next day, Ricky showed up at my house carrying a couple of drinks and wearing the grin of someone who had just watched the best fight of his life. So, he said as he dropped onto my couch. Word's getting around. Oh, Vivian's been calling everybody she can think of, trying to find a lawyer who can get that money back. I raised an eyebrow. There isn't one. I know, Ricky laughed. That's the funny part. He handed me a drink. From what I've heard, she's already talked to 3 different lawyers, all looking for some magical loophole. There isn't one. That sounded exactly like Vivian. She'd always believed the rules applied to everyone except her. Ricky took another sip before leaning forward. Here's the thing. You've got leverage now. The Hartleys are old money. They don't like being lied to. If they ever find out how Vivian and Brooke described you. I thought about that for a moment. I'm not trying to ruin Brooke's wedding. Ricky shook his head. Brother, she already lit that fire herself. You're just deciding whether you want to hand her a fire extinguisher or let it burn. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. When I answered, a calm, polite woman introduced herself. Mr. Hollis? This is Judith Hartley, Connor's mother. She explained that she'd heard conflicting stories and wanted to understand what was actually true before her family made any final decisions about the wedding. I asked what she'd been told. There was a brief pause. Then she answered carefully. We were told that you were mostly absent during Brooke's childhood, that Wesley was the stable father figure, and that the divorce happened because of your personal issues. I slowly sat down on my couch. Mrs. Hartley, I said, I've been a union electrician for 28 years. Same job, same union. I worked every day to provide for my daughter. I never missed a child support payment. I never missed a custody exchange. I attended every holiday I was entitled to. I went to every school event I could. I have records showing I co-signed her first car. I have proof that I helped pay for her college. I have medical bills showing what I covered. If you'd like, I can provide copies of everything. There was silence on the other end. Finally, Judith spoke. That's not what we were told. I'm sure it isn't, I replied. After another pause, she asked, Mr. Hollis, would you be willing to meet with my husband and me? We'd really like to hear your side of the story in person. I thought about it for only a few seconds. When and where? We agreed on a time and place. The Sunday before the meeting, Ricky showed up at my house carrying a legal pad, ready to help me prepare. All right, Ricky said as he settled into a chair. Let's go through everything. What exactly do you have? I'd spent the entire week gathering documents. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted the truth to speak for itself. We spread everything across my kitchen table. There were child support records dating all the way back to the divorce. Bank statements showing every contribution I'd made to Brooke's education fund. Medical bills I'd paid. The paperwork from co-signing her first car. Report cards with both my signature and Vivian's. Photos from birthdays, holidays, school events. Years of memories laid out in front of us. Ricky picked up one stack of photos. You were at her high school graduation? 3rd row, I said. I got there early so I could get a good seat. He held up a picture of Brooke wearing her cap and gown. I was standing beside her, both of us smiling. This was 2 years after Vivian remarried, he said. And you were still showing up for everything? I never stopped. He set the picture down and shook his head. And they told the Hartleys you were absent? He let out a frustrated laugh. Man, I'm so angry. It's okay, I replied. I've got the receipts. Ricky shook his head in disgust. Vivian always had a talent for rewriting history. You remember when she told everyone the divorce happened because you worked too much? He snorted. Funny how she left out the part where she was sleeping with Wesley. I didn't want to reopen old wounds. That's not what this is about. Maybe it should be, Ricky replied. They lied about you, Jace. And they're still lying. They've used those lies to push you out of your own daughter's wedding. I looked down at the piles of paperwork covering my table. 26 years of proof. Proof that I'd shown up. Proof that I'd tried. Proof that I never stopped being Brooke's father, even when walking away would have been much easier. The Hartleys seem like decent people, I said. Judith sounded genuinely confused when we talked. It felt like the story she'd been told didn't match what she was seeing. Ricky frowned. What do you mean? She told me Connor had mentioned meeting me briefly at an engagement party. He described me as a normal guy, but Brooke and Vivian painted a completely different picture. They made me sound like some deadbeat father who barely existed. The stories didn't add up. Ricky nodded. So she's checking the facts herself. Looks that way. Smart woman. He picked up his legal pad. All right. What do you actually want out of this meeting? I thought about it for a moment. I don't want to ruin Brooke's wedding. I just want them to know the truth. What they do with it after that is their decision. Ricky scribbled a note. Fair enough. But be ready for the fallout. When Brooke finds out you've talked directly to the Hartleys, she's going to lose it. Let her. He looked at me carefully. You sure? She's your daughter. I looked away for a moment. She stopped being my daughter the day she called another man her dad. At this point, I'm just the guy who donated the DNA. Ricky sat quietly for a few seconds before putting his pen down. I've known you my whole life. You're not a vindictive person. I'm not being vindictive. I'm being honest. There's a difference. He cracked open a drink and nodded. All right. Let's get your talking points together. We spent the next 2 hours organizing everything. By the time Ricky left, I had a neat folder filled with the most important documents and a clear plan for what I wanted to say. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening. The Hartleys had chosen a neutral location, a conference room at their church. Ricky offered to come with me for support. I thanked him but declined. This was something I needed to do on my own. Monday night, my phone rang. It was Brooke. The first time she'd contacted me since the confrontation in my driveway. Her voice was tense. I hear you've been talking to Connor's mother. I didn't bother asking how she found out. It didn't matter. She called me, I replied. She asked questions, and I answered them. What did you tell her? The truth. Silence. Then she spoke again. You had no right. I had every right. You lied about me, Brooke. I simply corrected the record. You're going to ruin everything. I shook my head even though she couldn't see it. No. The lies were always going to ruin everything. They were just waiting to catch up. Her voice turned cold. You're going to regret this. I sighed. You keep saying that. So far, it hasn't happened. She hung up without another word. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Tuesday finally arrived. The church conference room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old hymn books. A long table sat in the center of the room, surrounded by folding chairs. The fluorescent lights buzzed quietly overhead. In one corner sat a coffee urn that looked like it had been brewing the same mediocre coffee since the Carter administration. I arrived 15 minutes early. I placed my folder on the table and chose a seat near the middle. Not at the head. This wasn't my meeting to control. I just wanted to be somewhere I could be seen and heard. A few minutes later, the Hartleys arrived. Judith was tall, silver-haired, and carried herself like someone who had spent years in boardrooms making difficult decisions. Her husband, Henry, was shorter and broader, with rough, calloused hands that made it obvious he'd spent part of his life doing real work before finding success. They shook my hand and took their seats across from me. Thank you for coming, Judith said. I know this isn't exactly a conventional situation. I told her I appreciated the chance to finally set the record straight. Connor walked in a moment later, looking uneasy. He gave me a small nod before sitting beside his mother. The kid wasn't the enemy here. He'd simply been fed the wrong story. Then the others arrived. Brooke entered first, her face carefully blank. The same expression she'd learned from her mother over the years. Vivian followed, carrying herself with the kind of wounded dignity she always used like a weapon. Wesley came in last. His expensive cashmere coat was gone, replaced with a simple blazer, doing his best to look humble for the audience. The three of them sat across from me. Brooke chose the seat farthest away. Henry cleared his throat. We're here to clear up a few things before moving forward with the wedding plans. Judith spoke with Mr. Hollis last week, and what she learned doesn't match what we've been told. We want to give everyone a chance to explain. Vivian started to speak, but Henry raised a hand, stopping her. We'll begin with Mr. Hollis. I looked around the table. Every pair of eyes was on me. The moment felt heavy, but not in a bad way. It felt like finally putting down a burden I'd been carrying for far too long. I've been Brooke's father for 26 years, I began. I was married to Vivian for 14 of those years, and we've been divorced for the last 12. During our marriage, I worked hard. I provided for my family. I was there for birthdays, holidays, school events, everything that mattered. After the divorce, I followed our custody agreement to the letter. I never missed a child support payment. I never missed a pickup. And I never passed up an opportunity to be part of my daughter's life. I opened the folder I'd brought and carefully laid the documents on the table one by one. This is my child support record. Every payment made on time, for 12 straight years. I placed another document beside it. This is the paperwork from when I co-signed Brooke's first car loan. I wasn't absent. I was the person she called. Next came another paper. This is the hospital bill from when she was 16 and needed emergency surgery. I sat in that waiting room for 6 hours. Then I added a graduation photo. This was taken at her high school graduation. I'm sitting in the third row. I even took the day off work so I could be there. Finally, I pulled out the last document. And this is the statement from the savings account I opened for Brooke when she was 3 years old. I contributed to it for 23 years. I paused. I closed it 2 weeks ago because I was told I wasn't her real father. The room fell completely silent. Judith carefully studied each document in front of her. Henry's expression had shifted from neutral to something much closer to anger. Connor looked at Brooke in disbelief. Is that true? Brooke's jaw tightened. He's exaggerating. I looked at her calmly and shook my head. Which part? The child support records from the county? The bank statements showing every deposit? The hospital receipt with my signature? Before Brooke could answer, Wesley leaned forward. Financial contributions don't make someone a parent. Being there emotionally. I was there emotionally. I interrupted before he could finish. I was there physically. I was there in every way a father can be. I held his gaze. You came into Brooke's life when she was 14 with a leased car and a trust fund. You bought her affection. I earned mine. His face darkened instantly. Vivian's voice turned cold and sharp. This is exactly why we didn't want you here. This inability to accept that Brooke has relationships with other people. I looked directly at her. I accepted that she had a stepfather. I never tried to undermine your marriage or Wesley's relationship with Brooke. But you didn't just build him up, you tore me down. You told these people I was absent, that I wasn't really involved. I paused. That's not just unfair. That's erasure. Judith spoke softly. We were told Jace was basically a stranger, that he only showed up occasionally and wasn't really part of Brooke's everyday life. She turned to Vivian. Vivian stared down at the table. Connor suddenly stood up, his chair scraping loudly across the floor. I asked you, he said. I specifically asked you about Brooke's biological father. You told me he wasn't in the picture. Brooke's calm expression finally broke. He was barely in the picture. Every other weekend isn't being a parent. Every other weekend was what the court allowed me, I replied. I asked for more time. Your mother's lawyer made sure I didn't get it. Vivian's face flushed bright red. That's a lie. Check the court records. Connor was still standing. His eyes moved from Brooke to Vivian, then back to Brooke. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes right before everything falls apart. So, you lied about your father just to make your family look better? No one moved. Brooke opened her mouth, but no words came out. Vivian's face turned pale. Wesley stared at the floor. The silence dragged on until it became almost unbearable. Henry turned to his son. Connor, we need to talk. Privately. Connor gave a small nod. He looked at Brooke one last time, and I watched something change in his expression. Disappointment. The kind that comes when you realize the person you thought you knew isn't who you believed they were. Then he walked out with his parents. The door closed behind them. Now it was just the four of us, me, Brooke, Vivian, and Wesley. Brooke spoke first, her voice trembling. Are you happy now? You ruined everything. I calmly gathered my documents and slipped them back into the folder. If the truth ruins things, I said, that isn't my fault. You had no right. I had every right. Wesley stepped forward. You need to think about what you're doing here, Jace. Family disputes can be worked out, but if you blow this up, it's already blown up, I interrupted. You three lit the fuse. I'm just refusing to let you blame me for the explosion. Vivian stood and grabbed her purse. We'll see about that. This isn't over. I shrugged. For me, it is. They left. Brooke never looked back. I stayed in that room for another 10 minutes, listening to the steady buzz of the fluorescent lights and the quiet gurgling of the coffee urn. Then I packed up my folder and went home. The next 3 weeks were complete chaos. Not my chaos. Theirs. I simply watched everything unfold from a comfortable distance. Ricky kept me updated through his usual grapevine. After the meeting at the church, the Hartleys had gone into full investigation mode. They verified everything I told them, the child support records, the bank statements, the graduation photos. The wedding wasn't canceled. It was postponed indefinitely while Connor and Brooke, according to the official statement, worked through some things. Unofficially, according to Ricky's sources, Connor was seriously questioning whether he wanted to marry someone who had lied to his family about something so fundamental. Vivian called me 5 times during the first week. I never answered. Her voicemails started out angry but gradually turned desperate. Jace, we need to talk about this. For Brooke's sake, the wedding is at risk. Whatever problems we have, we can work through them. But you need to call the Hartleys and explain that you overreacted. Please. I ignored every message. Wesley never called. Probably the smartest decision he made. Brooke reached out exactly once. She sent a long email. It started with blame, then slowly shifted into self-pity. She wrote that I was ungrateful for everything she'd done for me. She said I didn't understand how difficult it had been growing up between 2 households. She claimed Wesley had been more present during her important teenage years. She insisted she had never meant to hurt me. She had simply made choices that happened to have that effect. The closest she came to taking responsibility was one sentence near the end. I understand now that some of my decisions were hurtful, and I regret the pain they caused. Not, I'm sorry I lied about you. Not, I was wrong to erase you from my life. I read the email twice, searching for some genuine acknowledgement of what she had done. Some admission that she had lied about me. Some sign of real remorse. There was nothing. I replied with just 2 sentences. When you're ready to have an honest conversation about what happened, I'm willing to listen. Until then, I don't have anything to say. She never wrote back. Ricky came over the following Friday. We sat on my back porch, even though it was cold enough that we could see our breath. Word is, he said, the Hartleys are pulling their wedding funding. They were going to pay for the venue and the catering. Now they're not. I nodded. That's a lot of money. About 50 grand, from what I heard, Ricky said. Judith told someone at their church she couldn't, in good conscience, fund a marriage that started with deception. Those were her exact words. I let that sink in. The Hartleys weren't just pulling their financial support. They were making a statement. Guess Wesley's trust fund is about to take a hit, I said. Ricky grinned. That's the funny part. There's not nearly as much money in that trust fund as everyone thinks. Vivian's been draining it for years. The house, the cars, the lifestyle, it's mostly smoke and mirrors at this point. I took a moment to process that. So Brooke's dream wedding was being paid for by the Hartleys. And now that money's gone. Yep. And the savings account I closed would have covered the difference. Exactly. And without either one? He shook his head. They're scrambling. I took a long sip of my drink. Life comes at you fast. Ricky chuckled. Brother, you're not kidding. The following week, Vivian's sister reached out to me. Aunt Paula. She was a reasonable woman, and during my marriage to Vivian, we'd always gotten along well. She asked if we could meet for coffee. She said she wanted to hear my side of everything that had happened. I agreed. Paula had never done anything to wrong me, and she seemed genuinely confused rather than accusatory. We met at a diner on the south side of town. She looked exhausted, like she'd been caught in the middle of a mess she never wanted to be part of. I talked to Vivian, she said. I also talked to the Hartleys. Their stories don't match. I'm not surprised, I replied. She sighed. I can't believe Vivian actually told people you were an absent father. You did everything a father could possibly do for his daughter. She paused for a moment before continuing. Jace, I've known my sister my whole life. She has a gift for making herself the victim in every story. She looked down at her coffee. But this, I didn't realize it had gone this far. I didn't gloat. I simply laid out the facts. Paula listened quietly from beginning to end. When I finished, she sat silently for a long moment. What happens now? She finally asked. That's up to them. I've said what I needed to say. The truth is out there now. If they want to rebuild something with me, they know where to find me. And if they don't, I gave a small shrug. Then I keep living my life. I've spent too many years waiting for people to appreciate me. I'm done waiting. She reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. I should have seen it sooner. I told her it wasn't her fault. And I meant it. 3 months later, I was in my garage replacing the starter on my truck when a car pulled into my driveway. I didn't recognize the vehicle, but I recognized the man who stepped out. Connor. He looked different from the last time I'd seen him. Less polished. More worn down. I wiped the grease from my hands with a rag and walked to the edge of the garage. Mr. Hollis. Got a few minutes? Yeah, I said. Sure. We sat on the tailgate of my truck. Neither of us seemed in any hurry to break the silence. It was early March. The cold still had a little bite to it, but the sun was shining and the wind had finally settled down. Connor spoke first. The wedding's off. He let the words hang there. I nodded. I'd heard the rumors. Yeah, he said quietly. Word gets around. He stared at the ground for a while. I kept trying to make it work. I kept telling myself every family has complicated issues, right? Nobody's perfect. That's true. But this wasn't just complicated. She lied. And when I started digging, really digging, it only got worse. I stayed quiet and let him continue. The lies about you were just the beginning. The semester abroad she said her mom paid for? That was you. The car she claimed her dad bought? You co-signed the loan. The medical emergency where Wesley supposedly came to the rescue? He wasn't even in the country. You were the one who was there. I gave a small nod. Sounds like you did your homework. I had to, he replied, because every time I tried talking to Brooke about it, she'd deflect. She'd change the subject. Somehow she always made me feel like I was the one causing problems just for asking questions. I knew that tactic. I'd lived with it for years. Connor slowly shook his head. The thing that hit me the hardest was how easy it was for her. The lying. There wasn't even any hesitation. She just rewrote reality like it was nothing, and expected me to accept it. That skill runs in the family, I said quietly. He almost smiled. My mother said something pretty similar. We sat there in silence for another minute. Finally, I asked, so what's next for you? He took a deep breath. I'm going to focus on work. Figure out who I am without her. For the last 8 months, my whole life revolved around planning a wedding and bringing 2 families together. He looked out toward the road. It feels strange to just stop. I understood exactly what he meant. That empty feeling when obligations disappear and suddenly leave more space than you know what to do with. Connor nodded. You know, he said, my parents really like you. Oh, my mom said you remind her of my grandfather. Straightforward. What you see is what you get. I smiled. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. Connor stood up and brushed the dust off his pants. We shook hands. Thanks for taking the time to talk, he said. No problem. I gave him a small smile. Good luck, son. He drove away, and I went back to replacing the starter on my truck. A few weeks later, Ricky filled me in on what had happened with Brooke. Without the Hartley's money, and without the savings account I had closed, the wedding would have been impossible to pull off. But that wasn't the only consequence. Vivian and Wesley's finances, which had already been under pressure, took another hit when several of Wesley's investments went bad. It turned out he'd been taking big risks with what was left of his trust fund, chasing returns he couldn't afford to lose. The comfortable lifestyle they had worked so hard to project was starting to fall apart. People were talking about them selling the big house and downsizing to something smaller. Apparently, Brooke had moved back in with them. The upscale apartment she'd been renting, paid for, I now suspected, with money Vivian had quietly drained from Wesley's trust fund, was no longer affordable. At 26 years old, Brooke was back in her childhood bedroom, watching the carefully crafted image of her life unravel. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, they had looked down on my modest home, my dependable truck, and my simple way of living. Now they were discovering that the foundation they had built their lives on wasn't nearly as solid as they believed. Turns out, character is a better investment than cashmere coats. In April, Aunt Paula called me. She said Vivian had been asking about me and wanted to know if I'd be willing to talk. I told Paula I had already said everything I needed to say. The next move was theirs. But I wasn't going to pretend none of this had happened just to make them feel better about themselves. She's not going to apologize, Paula warned me. You know that. I know. Vivian had never apologized for anything in her life, and Brooke had learned that habit from the best. Then we have nothing to talk about. Paula accepted my answer. Honestly, I think she expected it. Summer came and Ricky and I took a fishing trip to Wisconsin. For a week, I didn't think about any of it. I just cast my line into the lake, enjoyed the quiet, and let myself breathe. When I got home, there was a letter waiting in my mailbox. There was no return address. I didn't need one. I recognized Brooke's handwriting immediately. For a while, I considered not opening it. Maybe the mature thing would have been to read it with an open heart, hoping for an apology and a chance to rebuild what had been broken. But I'd spent 26 years being the mature one, being patient, being the bigger person. In the end, I opened it anyway. The letter was 3 pages long. Most of it was explanation without apology. She wrote that she'd been confused, that she'd felt caught between 2 families, and the rest was more of the same. When I finished reading it, I folded it up and placed it in a drawer. Maybe I'd answer someday. Maybe I wouldn't. Either way, I wasn't in any rush. By October, I had a new apprentice at work. His name was Tyler. He was 22, eager to learn the trade, and he reminded me a lot of myself at that age. He showed up early, stayed late, and never complained when the work got tough. One afternoon during lunch, he looked at me and asked, "Do you have any kids?" I took another bite of my sandwich and thought about it for a moment. "I have a daughter," I finally said, "but we're not close." He nodded as if that answer was enough. He didn't ask any more questions. Smart kid. That evening, I sat on my back porch as the sun slowly disappeared below the horizon. The air had that crisp autumn chill that reminds you winter is coming, even if it hasn't arrived yet. The trees in my backyard were half bare, and leaves were scattered across the lawn I'd soon have to rake. I found myself thinking about Brooke, about Vivian, about Wesley, about all the years I had spent trying to be enough for people who had already decided I never would be. And that was when I realized something that felt an awful lot like peace. I had stood up for myself. I had refused to let myself be treated like a ghost. I had refused to let them erase me. Whatever happened after that was no longer in my hands. Maybe Brooke would find her way back to me someday. Maybe she wouldn't. Either way, I was done carrying the weight of her choices. I had spent decades being a father, showing up, staying, holding the line when walking away would have been easier. That was enough. It had always been enough. The fact that she couldn't see it wasn't my burden anymore. To everyone watching, we're so close to reaching 2,000 subscribers on this channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. It really helps us reach that 2,000 subscriber milestone. Thank you for helping make this dream come true.